All right, and we're back. This chapter 1 review. Again, the first assessment we have tomorrow. Then we'll get into chapter 2 next week. All right, let's get after it. Anybody want to provide their own example of population? I'll think of one. I mean, I've given so many different examples. What else could I say? Population is, and it says to be specific both in detail. If I said my population is, all the teachers of Lake High School, and then I could say a sample of that population are the math teachers of Lake High School, right? Can anybody tell me what type of sample that would be? If I just said, if my population was the teachers of Lake High School, and then I surveyed all the math teachers of Lake High School, what do you think that would be? Because I'm taking all of one specific group. I'm taking a cluster, right? Cluster sample. That would be a cluster sample. Anybody want to provide their own? Come on, one person. Tell me what population.
Mine's kind of goofy.
That's okay.
I said,
I'm pretty good.
I had all of the engineers for a large company.
Yeah.
And then I had a group, and then for my smaller one, I said a group of them who had just started.
Very good. Yep, exactly right. Now, and again, it just kind of depends on how you talk about it. Remember, whenever you say, here's the stipulation. Say the word all when talking about your population. Say the word all of the, and then describe it, okay? And then just make sure when you select a sample of that, when you talk about your sample, just make sure that you say, make sure that that sample could only be a part of that group. Yeah. Okay, number 2 here, identify the population of the following survey, be specific. A recent survey showed that 70% of single fathers in Ohio consider themselves to be financially secure. All right, so what is the population of that survey? Let me ask you this. If I said fathers in Ohio, all fathers in Ohio, would that be the correct population? No, because I'm leaving out one distinct characteristic, right? I'm leaving out the fact that, okay, this is only talking about single fathers in Ohio. 70% of single fathers in Ohio. So if I were to just state my population, I would have to go with all, again, use the word all single fathers in Ohio. Right? That's the defining characteristic. So I would say all single fathers in Ohio. Again, it's not all fathers. It's not all fathers in the U.S. It's not all fathers in Ohio. It's single fathers in Ohio. That's our population here. Yeah, I am taking a survey of those people. Okay. Number 3, determine whether each data set is a population or a sample. The names of all, look there, all, right? The names of all the custodians at Lake High School. All. Population. A survey of 5 out of all the school principals. Now I see the word all, but be careful. It's a survey of 5 out of all the high school principals in Stark County. So is that a population or a sample? What's interesting about this is that, I create these assessments. There is some human error in some of these, and obviously this is the 4th time I've taught this class, so my assessments get better and better as we go. But my first semester I had people argue with me with different wordings of questions, and I'm not closed off to thinking that the wording of my questions are all exactly accurate. And I've had people say well, wait a second, I thought about it like this, and I'll be like, well, if you want to argue it like that, I guess you would say that would be correct in saying it like that. So if you ever get your test back and you're like, wait a second, this is how I thought the question was, what I thought the question was asking. If you make a valid reason for your argument, then I'm not, I wouldn't be unwilling to, give you some points back for it. All right. Determine whether each numerical value is a parameter or a statistic. Determine whether each numerical value is a parameter or a statistic. Remember, parameter refers to a population value. A statistic is a sample value. So the average height of the Cleveland Cavaliers' entire roster. Now, the word here, entire roster, right? Entire roster. That's telling me that I'm talking about the population of Cleveland Cavaliers players, right? So would that be a parameter or statistic? Parameter. Yeah, parameter. So this is a parameter because I'm referring to all of the roster. The average cost of 5 randomly selected cars at a dealership. Okay, that's a statistic. T. Statistic. Statistic. That is a statistic of. Right, sample of all the cars at a particular dealership. Okay. So we have a parameter and then a statistic here. Number 5. Determine whether the data sets are qualitative versus quantitative. Now, remember, try to think about qualitative as like a descriptive characteristic, right? A characteristic of a certain quantity, right? If I talk about years, because I had somebody say to me, like, oh, isn't a year just like a label in time though? Like, isn't that just a label? That I'm like, be careful about that. Years is still quantitative, right? Years is still quantitative. They are still numerical values, quantitative, right? I guess if you really get down to it, if you really like think about it theoretically, all numbers are really just names of things, right? Like who said this many was supposed to use the word two, right? Like, all math is invented by humans anyway. So, just kind of don't think too in depth about it. List of Lake student ID numbers. Now this, if I am talking about the student ID numbers, remember that is like a characteristic of you, right? That is like your name in numbers, right? So that would be qualitative. Qualitative. Yeah, that would be qualitative because again, it is a label of you, right? It is a characteristic of you. Average numbers of hours of sleep. Okay, that's quantitative again. Quantitative. And then a list of favorite movies. Quantitative or qualitative? Qualitative. Qualitative. Right. Quantity, think number, quality, qualitative. Distinct characteristic for qualitative. Okay. List off the classifications of measurement levels and provide an example of each one. Okay, classifications of measurement, right? There are a couple different lists that we can make. Like we have classifications of measurement that will be on the assessment. We will have the types of data collection methods, and there are sampling techniques, right? There are a couple different sets of things. Please be careful not to confuse the sets. Like if I say classification measurements and then you accidentally list it off like cluster, stratified, that's different. Classification measurements, okay, the classifications of measurement, that's the, I use the acronym NOIR, N-O-I-R, right? So that's nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. Nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Right? Those are the classifications of measuring. Those are the different ways that we could talk about levels of data, right? Levels of whether that be quantitative or qualitative. So let's kind of like talk through. An example of nominal would be I'm trying to think of one that I don't use on the review. That would be like, okay, like the list of classes that you take, right? Like the list of classes that you take. Now, the interesting part here is that like I could take a nominal set of data and then tweak it a little bit to make it ordinal. Like for example, if I had said my nominal set of data was the classes that you take, and then I said, okay, the ordinal set of data, to make that ordinal, I would say your like schedule. You know what I mean? Because then you're putting it in order, right? Then you're putting it in order. You're putting it from period 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, right? So that changes it from a nominal to an ordinal. Like for example, I could say, your classes are your nominal, and then I say, well, your favorite classes. Well, then that's putting a rank to it. That's putting an ordinal to it. Now remember, nominal and ordinal are usually qualitative. Where as soon as I cross over into that interval and ratio, that's where it's quantitative. You can't have qualitative data in an interval. It's got to be quantitative. You can't have qualitative go down to the interval and ratio. And remember, this is kind of like an umbrella, right? All ratio could be considered interval, ordinal, and nominal. All interval could also be considered ordinal and nominal. All ordinal could be also considered nominal. That's why you can like tweak it to say, okay, you should give me the best of those things, or the rank of those things. Interval. Okay, now remember that interval is like the sliding scale 0. I always think time and temperature, where 0 is just a position on a scale, right? I always think the best ways to talk about interval level is time and temperature. And then when we talk about ratio level, that's like what we normally think of data, right? If I had to guess, if I said, think about a data set, you'd probably think about a data set that was ratio. Now be careful. When I say think about time and temperature, I was just going to give the example of, okay, like the amount of hours that you sleep, right? That's a quantitative value. I know I said it's time, but I'm talking about like, that's an actual value that you have. That would be considered ratio that you have, right? And when I talk about time, I think of like, okay, like the years that a presidential election has occurred, right? That's interval because 0 is just a sliding scale on it, right? Okay, and yeah, provide an example of each one to use. Yeah. Any questions about any of those, or believe that they weren't sure about their own example? If you have any questions, please stop me as we go. I'll just keep on trucking. Identify the data set's levels of measurements. The birth years of math teachers. Birth years of math teachers. That's actually not accurate anymore. I got to change those now. Birth years of math teachers. Nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. What's the most specific type? Interval. Yeah, it's times, years, right? Interval. This would be interval. The number of workers in an office building. Number of workers in office buildings. That's ratio. The average high temperature in the month of December. That's interval again. That's interval. Because again, 0 is just a position on a scale for temperature as well, right? I could go below, I could go above. Really, differences in between them are valuable pieces of information, but the ratio of them is not really a valuable piece of information. Cartoons in the local paper. Nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Well, it can't be interval or ratio because it's a qualitative, right? Both D and E. Can't be interval or ratio, so it's got to be either nominal or ordinal. Well, am I ranking those cartoons in any way? Do I put them in any sort of order? Nope. That is just nominal. Name alone. Nominal. And then lastly, the list of Mr. Laverick's favorite top 5 favorite TV shows. Yeah, I could watch The Baking Show. I feel like that should be higher. Like I could just sit and watch like that whole season. It makes me hungry too. But I don't know. Lost was so good. Oh, so good. Ordinal, right? I'm getting off track. Ordinal. Ordinal. I feel like Seinfeld should be lower. It's funny, but in front of The Office. Any questions about those? I remember when episodes were coming out of Lost, like every Wednesday, me and my roommate in college would sit there and watch. If you not watch, is Lost on any sort of streaming service? I don't know. Yeah, if it is, you guys should watch that. Binge that. Holy cow! The ending, mind blown. I won't give it away. All right, answer the following questions concerning the different sampling techniques. Okay, so there's different sampling techniques and different data collection methods, right? What am I talking about when I say sampling techniques? Okay, think about cluster sample, stratified sample, systematic sample, convenience sample, anything that you would use the word sample afterward, that is a sampling technique. Any way that you would collect that data, whether that be a survey or a simulation or a observation, things like that. That's the methods of data collection. How do you actually collect that data? Please don't confuse the two. I didn't think that was going to be an issue, and then I remember the first semester I taught this. I had several people, like 3 or 4 people, mix them up. So much so that I went back in my notes and I was like, did I ever say them as the other thing? So please keep those straight in your head. Sampling techniques that's the stratified, cluster, convenience, anything that you would use the word sample afterward. And data collection methods, those are the ones where you're actually performing something like an experiment or observation or something. Describe one strength and one weakness of performing a survey. Okay, a strength of a survey. Super easy to do, right? It is not difficult at all. That is a strength. That is a good thing about a survey. It is very easy to do. Probably does not take a lot of time. That's another strength. It is easy to send out. It is easy to get responses. What is one weakness of a survey? Well, you could be biased in the way that you ask the questions, right? You can be biased in the way that you ask the questions. You have to be very careful about that. A weakness, it may be if somebody's just answering a Google form, they might not be as willing to be truthful, right? They might not be truthful. You might not get the best data. But again, if you increase the sample size to the thousands or to the millions, the data gets better and better. But I would say a weakness is not always the best data. People may not be truthful. Biased surveys. Okay. And again, when I'm going to be asking you to do this, like on your assessment, if you would like to give, you could be generic, like I did just then, or you could give a specific example. You could say, well, if you had a survey about this, it would be this. This would be a strength of that. That's totally fine. Same thing here. Describe one strength and one weakness of using a systematic sample. Using a systematic sample. Now, remember, what does systematic mean? That means lining everybody up in terms of a random order, right? Lining everybody up, and then you're going to be taking a systematic, every 10th person I'm going to be surveying, right? Or every 30th person, whatever you want your sample size. Right? So that is a systematic sample. So one strength of that is that it is very random. It is very random. You are not, especially because you're taking the certain amount of people. That is a very random sample. One weakness, it may not, and I say may not, it may not turn out to be representative. You may be missing parts of the population. Like what happens if, every 10th person I picked was a male, right? Or maybe every 10th person I picked was a freshman, or something, and then it may not be truly representative of the entire population. So that could be a weakness. So you might not get data over all parts of your population. Discuss a potential negative consequence that can occur from using an experiment that is not performed blind. Okay. Remember, being blind is the fact that the participants don't know which treatment they are getting, or whether they are in the treatment group rather than the control group. So a potential negative consequence that it is not blind, well, the treatment group could have effects that, they since they know they're getting the treatment, their body could just, have the reaction that they think is going to happen, right? Their mind does it for them. The mind is a really powerful thing. So your mind could actually make your body do that thing. I've heard that. I've seen this on like TV shows, like House, where women have like hysterical pregnancies. You ever hear that? It's like the body the woman wants to be pregnant so bad that the body believes it is pregnant, and so therefore the stomach grows, the hormone levels go up, but there's no baby inside. It's like the weirdest thing. It's called a hysterical pregnancy. So the body may have a reaction that is not actually caused by the treatment. Or if you are in the control group, you know you are in the your brain knows that you are in that certain group and it may react a certain way. I guess I'll just leave it at that. D here. Mr. Laverick wants to know how many dogs the average Lake High School student has. He decides separate. He decides to separate everyone by math class and then randomly sample 5 students from each math class. Which sampling method did he use? Which sampling method did he use? Somebody said, oh, it's convenient because you're using math classes and you're a math teacher. But I didn't pick my students, did I? He decides to separate everyone by math class and then randomly sample 5 students from every math class. I would not say convenience for this. What would you say? Stratified. Yeah, stratified. Because I am separating them into blocks and then saying, okay, I am taking 5 from you and 5 from you and 5 from you and 5 from you. Right? If I was surveying students' thoughts on math or whether they liked math or not, right? Of course, every one of my students would say they liked math. Mr. Bergen gave me a look. Of course, every one of my students would say they would like math. So, but I would need to take a sample because obviously different math. Where if you took like Mr. D-Lab's class, like no. So that again would be stratified. All right, next one up here. For each of the scenarios, state which method of data collection would be most likely. So method of data collection. Method of data collection. So that is not a survey. That is not like, I'm sorry, no. That is not a sampling technique, right? These are not sampling techniques. This is, okay, how do I collect the data, right? Now, I'm not talking about sampling techniques. I'm talking about methods of data collection to get the best results. Now, this is where you can make arguments on, different types of data collection methods. I am talking about the best way to do these things. In my opinion, it's the best way. Feel free to explain your answers if you feel more than one answer is possible. Really, as long as you either provide my opinion on the best one to use, or, and I hope I've made that clear, or if you don't use the best one, I would give a reason why your answer is the best one. You want to know what people think about what should be done about the national debt. What are you going to do? You're going to observe them? You're going to experiment on them? No, you're going to survey them, right? You're going to survey. You're going to use a survey. You want to study the effects of a certain medication with different dosages on its patients. Now, could you observe them? Could you do an observation? Yes, but what would be better? Experiment, right? You could have different groups, different control group, whatever. Experiment. Now, don't be confused. Like, because somebody said one time, well, aren't you observing within the experiment? Yeah, but that's like in the context of the experiment. Yeah. When I talk about an observational study, I am just saying, like, I am just going to observe what is happening without having any effect on anybody, right? That's like, I think about, if I want to do an observational study on, well, what's the one? I want to examine the behavior of freshmen in an Algebra 1 class, right? Or I would say maybe I want to observe the behavior of, like squirrels in my backyard. Like I'm not putting them into groups. I'm not putting them into I'm just looking at them, right? That is just an observational study. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself there, but observation. You want to find out the average time students go to sleep at LHS. Now, I would not do an observation. I would not go around to each person's house and be like, "You sleeping?" No, I would not do an observation. What would you say? Survey. Yeah, I think a survey would be good there as well, right? Okay. Now, in terms of pros and cons, we kind of talked about strengths and weaknesses of surveys. Like for that example, like, do you actually know the time you go to bed? Like you go to sleep? Like the time you go to bed, but you just stay up, scroll on your phone for a while. But you don't actually know, like, so in terms of those surveys, yeah, okay, that's kind of a weakness too. Like, you just kind of like, the accuracy in a survey is not really there a lot of the times. You want to study how fast a certain disease will spread if introduced into a crowded city. Simulation, right? Simulation. Now, kind of going back to the survey question, when we do our Chapter 2 projects, when we perform our surveys, because we will do a survey in Chapter 2, we kind of have to think about the best way to ask the question so that we get the most accurate answers, right? Because you create the question that you're going to ask, you create the data set that you have. So if you can word your question in a way so that you get a very good set of data, that's the goal. That's the goal. We want to study how fast a certain disease will spread if introduced into a crowded city. Simulation. All right. And our last one here. Consider the following example. Consider the following. We want to study Algebra 1 OST scores of schools in Stark County. Give an example of how you would perform a cluster sample, stratified sample, systematic sample, or convenience sample. Okay, so let's go through each one and talk about it. Remember that a cluster sample, we kind of talked about it already, would be separating into groups and then taking all of that group, right? That's a cluster sample. So in this example, we want to study Algebra 1 OST scores of schools in Stark County. To create a cluster sample, we could separate into districts. And then, now, be careful here. I would separate them into districts. And then, what would I do when I separate them into districts? To make it a true cluster sample, we would separate them into districts and then do what? Take all of one, right? And make sure you say, so we separate them into districts. We got Lake, we got Hoover, we got Group, whatever. And then we would say, we would take all of one district, right? That is a true cluster sample. When you separate into groups and take all of one group, separate into groups, and then you take all of one group. That's a cluster sample. Okay, what about a stratified? Okay, so stratified. I would say that we're still going to separate into districts. We would still separate into districts. You could separate them in different ways too, right? You could separate them into geographic region, which is kind of like districts. You could separate them into socioeconomic status. You could separate them to gender, to race, ethnicity, things like that. But I'll just say separate into districts. And then what separates things from a cluster to a stratified is, well, I'm going to separate into districts, and then what am I going to do? I'm going to take a sample from each district, right? That's stratified. Sample, equal sample from each district. I'm going to take an equal sample. I'm going to take 10 of you and 10 of you and 10 of you and 10 of you, right? And those 10 are going to be random, right? So stratified would be separating into groups, then taking an equal sample from each group. So there's cluster, there's stratified. Let's talk about systematic. Systematic. Okay, am I separating them into groups anymore? No. Okay. So I am lining them up. I'm ordering them. Order all students. Random order, right? Random order of students. Just line them up. I wouldn't, here's the thing that I'm thinking about. When I say order all students, it would be different if I randomly ordered them or just ordered them in terms of like their school's ID numbers, because we all have our different ways of IDing numbers. Like some are bigger than some are smaller, and probably you would get all Lake students in a chunk in an order, and then you all Hoover students in a chunk in an order. And then when you go to do a systematic sample, that's not truly systematic anymore. That's more like stratified. Right? So we're going to randomly order all students, and then we're going to take every, I don't know, you can just pick a number, 20th student. We're going to order all students and then take every 20th student and sample them. Take their score. Systematic. And then convenience. Convenience. Okay. The most convenient method for us, if I was going to take a sample of a population of all students in Stark County, I would just say walk over to the mentoring class next door. Okay. Sample students next door. Just walk over and ask. That's convenient for us, isn't it? Is that giving a true representative sample? Heck no. Is that sample random? No. But it is convenient. Right? So again, there are pluses and minuses for each one. Right? There are strengths and weaknesses for each of these as well. Convenience, really easy, but very not great data. Not representative data. I shouldn't say not great data. Just not representative. We talked about systematic, stratified. I think stratified. Now, I'm trying to think about positives and negatives for a stratified. Positives and negatives for a cluster would be easy. Positives would be you get really good data on a certain set of population, a certain set of a sample, right? You get really very good data on it because you're almost like taking a census of that particular cluster, right? So you get really good data on that. Weakness of a cluster sample is you're leaving out an entire set of your population. You're leaving out multiple sets of your population. Stratified. Good thing is that you get a very representative sample. What would be a weakness of a stratified sample? I guess it would probably be difficult to perform because you have to get samples from all the different types of groups that you have. I would say that's a weakness because that would be either time consuming or probably pretty difficult to do. Okay, you got to make sure that you hit all the different types and then get a random sample from all that would be difficult to organize and such. Yeah. But yeah. Okay, any questions on any parts of the review? No? Perfect. All right, let me shut off the video. I'll post the video